Hey grade 5, this is Mr. B, and I'm here at the school today for the first time recording. Today we're going to be learning about Vikings and their long ships. Here, let's have a go. So why all the raiding? Why did they go out raiding? And then we'll learn about what they wore and how they got there. So yeah, going out raiding was a pretty big deal. You didn't just leave your home for no reason and go out venturing across seas with icebergs and foreign enemies and get involved in warfare for no reason. So they had to have a good reason. And part of the reason was that Scandinavian farmland wasn't that great. And so oftentimes you would go a Viking, which is kind of the way you say they're going off to be Vikings. And they went off to gather loot and to trade abroad to bring back some wealth, right? So this was somewhat part of their work, to keep busy and to keep being able to build up some wealth and to in a sense, in some ways survive, right? At least survive, to get a better life for themselves. This would be part of the way they would do it. Now, not that means that everything they did was justified, but that's what drove them to go out. So eventually, at first, most of the raids were light raids, just a couple vessels that would go off and land and attack weak settlements. They rarely at first got involved in fighting big armies. They would try and avoid that as much as possible, because that's not the reason why they went. They were trying to just go to make money, right? Not to die. Though there was traditions that if you died in battle, that was great, but then they'd go to Valhalla, which we'll talk about tomorrow, or next lesson rather. But in general, they were trying to avoid dying, so they didn't really want to get into big fights, and they just wanted to get a bit of quick loot and then head home. So that was the main thing. But later on, there was Viking armies as the kingdoms became bigger and the kings decided to launch big invasions. There were Viking armies, and lots of England was conquered, and also northern France. And so, as you go on, there's these big armies, and that actually changes how they dressed as well, because the armies would often wear different armor and stuff than just the regular guys going raiding, because the guys going raiding didn't expect to get into big battles. So what did they wear? Well, so generally all Vikings would have some sort of a helmet. Normally it was rounded, and it would have an aventail. An aventail is, if you see that picture in between the two guys on top there, it's a bit of chainmail that would come down past the helmet. So the helmet itself was smaller and mostly just covered the top of the head, and then you'd have this aventail that would go down and cover the rest of the body, or the rest of the head, and so that kind of made them more protected. That type of helmet there that you see there with the two kind of little eye holes, that was the most common helmet, and the helmet we see the most. And if you look in the picture below, that's the helmet that is there the most often. And then there's other types of helmets, which I'll talk about in a second. Next, chainmail would often be worn, and the aventail is basically made out of chainmail. And this is just a bunch of interlocking chains that protected you from someone slashing you with a sword, or getting you, normally slashing with a sword. And so that was pretty useful. It would also protect somewhat from stabbing, but generally spears were able to go through it. And also, if you got smoked with an axe, while the chainmail would stop the axe from cutting into you, the axe force would still hurt you quite a bit. So it didn't really protect you from the blunt force of things. It was only used really in pitched battles. So where you were with a large army of Vikings, would you see a lot of the Vikings wearing chainmail. And it's pretty expensive because it takes a lot of work to make chainmail during the medieval ages or during the Viking age. Someone has to, sit there and make all the individual chains, then link them all together. So it's quite a bit of work. And so it wasn't too often that you'd see this. There were people who would have them. Then there was lamellar armor. So you see the man with the grayish hair. He's wearing a sort of lamellar armor. So lamellar armor is an armor made by lacing together plates of iron or even hardened hide, and it creates like a protective coat. So they found quite a few of these little links. Now, this one was often used by people all over, especially around the Mediterranean, the Byzantine Empire, and the Muslims would also use lamellar armor, and a lot of different horsemen in the East. So there's a good chance that some of this armor was actually brought back via trading. And so, that was probably a big part of where they got this armor. As we'll talk about in a moment, they used a lot of foreign armor. Then next was just leather armor or cloth. So just leather was pretty expensive, actually, because you could use leather for a lot of other things. So to use leather for an armor was pretty expensive, but obviously less expensive than chainmail. Some people would have leather armor, but a lot of times you just go out with like cloth, multiple layers of cloth, like thicker coats, so that would somewhat protect you, especially from maybe a slash or something, or just the blunt force. It would pad you, right? So that was the idea there. Even Alexander the Great, he wore a type of cloth armor. So, cloth armor has been used for a long time. It's not absolutely, it's not like wearing your t-shirt, right? It's thicker than that, and it will protect you quite a bit. Now, the thing with most Viking armies was that they were just full of different types of armor because they would go around trading and stealing in their raids. So they would everyone would probably have something a bit different, because maybe you raided from France one year and then England another year. So you'd have all sorts of different kinds of armors and weapons. So it's hard to say exactly what a Viking would look like. But generally, the most common things would be like chainmail, leather and cloth, and then I guess some lamellar as well from the south. That's kind of what their armors would look like. Now for weapons. So their swords. Often we see this cool swords, kind of like the sword from Rohan, if you've ever watched Lord of the Rings. And I think in some ways the people of Rohan are, even though they ride horses, they do take a lot of, especially in the movie, they take a lot of their symbolism and their weaponry from the Vikings. Even their helmets on their horses, you can see that the helmets are Viking style helmets that the Rohan cavalry uses. That's for those if you've watched Lord of the Rings. The swords that they had were generally very, very expensive. But most warriors would probably have one because you'd make enough money from a raid that you'd be able to buy one. They were generally not made in Scandinavia because the iron in Scandinavia, at least at this time, was not that great. And so they would generally source the iron from elsewhere and buy swords on their journeys. But most warriors would have a sword after a raid or two. Generally, though, for the vast majority of people, you'd see a lot of axes, and that's why Vikings are often seen with axes. It would be because, the axe is basically, you can use it for chopping wood and doing all sorts, when you watch the video of making the boats, right? They have little axes, big axes, giant axes. So all you'd have to do to become a Viking warrior is to take your axe, and instead of using it to chop wood, you can chop people. And so, that's often what they would do. They would just take their axes. And sometimes they were specially made for war. Then you'd have a bit more of an ornate axe. But generally, a lot of times it was just a regular axe that was used now for battle. Then you had spears. Spears were actually, they were by far the most popular, and you'd see almost every army would have a whole bunch of spears. So axes would come in more in close combat after the formation maybe lost shape. Spears were very, very common. It's because Scandinavia had a lot of wood, and they also, the iron to make a spear is far less than a sword. This is probably another reason why axes were popular too. The iron needed to make an axe is less than a sword as well. And so yeah, they would have these these spears, which are just as effective, if not more effective, in battle than swords, because you can keep the people quite far away from you. You don't have to get up close. So if you have a sword against a spear, normally the spear will win. Even in this picture below there, that guy with the axe does not look like he's going to have a good time if that guy pushes that spear forward. Spears are also really good because they put all the force into the one tiny point, and when you put force into one point, you'll be able to puncture through the armor easier. You can test this by getting like a piece of paper and trying to push like a pencil sharpener through the paper versus pushing like a pen through the paper, right? And you'll see that the pencil sharpener or anything bigger and blunter won't be able to go through the paper, or you'll have to put a lot more force. But something sharp like a pen can go right in through the paper very easily. So this is the deal with spears too. Even if you have nice armor, if you get hit with a spear, all the force is on a very tiny point and it goes right in and it cuts through. So yeah, spears were very, very popular because of their effectiveness and also how cheap they were. So your spear could break, you could lose your spear, and it wouldn't be that great, but you wouldn't worry about it. There's also the fact that Odin, in their sagas and legends, he's supposed to have a spear, so that made it also kind of popular. It wasn't like dishonorable to have a spear because Odin had a spear. And Odin, we'll talk about him tomorrow. He's kind of the chief of the gods, of the Viking gods. Next, you'd have a lot of shields. So shields, actually more than armor, were the main protective item that Vikings would have. So you'd have this big shield. Normally it was round. There are some pictures of these kite shields, and you can search that up if you'd like. They're more, they have more of a angled, like teardrop shape to them. But yeah, generally they'd have these round shapes, as you see in the pictures above. And all these pictures, they basically all have round shields. And these would be just generally a big piece of wood. And that would be able to protect you quite well, especially when you formed a shield wall. So a lot of Vikings in their armies would get pretty tightly together. As you see up top, those guys are charging, but yeah, they would form a shield wall, and some guys would hold the shields above to protect from, arrows or spears, and others would face it forward to protect their fronts as they charged in. Now, there was a kind of a move that they had, like a tactic. So often these shield walls would just bash into each other and like push and shove, and that'd be how they fight. But there was a move or a maneuver where they would form like a point, where you'd just like a spear almost, to push through the shield wall. You'd form a point of men, and you'd run as like a kind of a big pointed force, and you'd try and pierce through the shield wall with a huge amount of body weight in one little area, so that the guys holding that area wouldn't be able to hold it anymore, and then you'd break through their shield wall while still having your shield wall, and that would start to disrupt their lines and maybe send their soldiers running. And that was called a Sveinfylking. I can't say that. I don't know how to say that exactly, especially not in Old Norse, but Sveinfylking, it looks like. So that actually means like boar tongue or something like that. So that's the Sveinfylking is the name of it. And they would, so Svein in German today still is like pig. That's kind of where you get that. So yeah, it's a big triangle charge. Okay, so longboats, Viking longboats, and knars or nars. So Viking ship design generally used these, it's called clinker built. And that's where you have overlapping planks. So each plank goes on top of the others, starting from the bottom. And as you go up, they're just placed on top, and there's kind of different material used to kind of fill in the gaps. Obviously, they're clinked pretty close together. They're nailed in together, so they're tight, but then there's also water sealant, so it stays, the water doesn't get inside. And these designs of their boats were really, really good. The long boats were designed for long distance journeys, and they also traveled pretty fast, and they were able to go into waters that were really, really, really shallow, so only a meter deep, and they could still go in there. That meant that unlike the regular ships that most Europeans would know and other people, which could basically only travel on the ocean, Viking ships were able to get right down little rivers, even small rivers. So you could imagine a meter deep water. Most of you are taller than, I think all of you are taller than a meter. So that means that's water you could generally stand in. And definitely I can stand in. It's only basically just a bit over half of me. So that's very, very shallow water. That's like a river that you can walk across. It's not a deep river. So that means Vikings could basically get anywhere that had water coming up to it. They often did. So you just all of a sudden you'd be way downriver, and a Viking ship would just arrive. Now Viking ships were not warships. So in Greece and the Mediterranean, you often had these galleys that had big rams on them, and they were meant to bash into each other. Sometimes they had catapults or other sorts of things. Viking ships were not meant to do that. They were meant to get there, just basically get the Vikings there, and the Vikings would jump off and fight on land. Sometimes you could have the Vikings strap their ships together to make like a big platform, but this was not very, very often that this happened. So most of the fighting would be with melee. The Romans, when they were using their ships, they often they didn't really use them, at least in the beginning, in much of a ship naval warfare. When they did naval warfare, they basically tried to stick to the other ship and just have like a land battle on the ship. And the Vikings were much the same way. They didn't really smash into other ships. One thing is their ships are pretty expensive, and they're not really designed for that. They're very light. So you don't want to be smashing your ship into anything. But another good thing about their Viking ships is that they can go either way. So generally the steering is one direction, but you could switch that, and also you could pull the steering out. And so if you had to, say you saw an iceberg coming in your way, you could stop quickly by pushing the oars in and paddling backwards. And because it's double-sided, it would have no problem going backwards, which was really, really good for this kind of ship, especially in the Arctic. Then you had these Nars. So Nars were not longboats. They're wider and bigger. They're built the same way, but they're just much broader. And the reason is these are merchant vessels. They're not like raiding vessels, and so they wouldn't have the same sort of design. They were meant to carry a whole bunch of stuff, and so they couldn't go down little rivers. They could go down some rivers, like big rivers, but nothing like. And they probably had a good, compared to some other trading vessels, they were probably still better, but they weren't able to get everywhere that a Viking longboat was, or a long ship. Yeah, longboat. Anyways, so this is kind of their Viking ships, so the Nars and the longboats. I'm going to probably hook up a video where I build the little paper longship. And yeah, other than that, this is this video here that I've put, and I'll probably link it as well. This is a video of a place where I've been in Roskilde, where they actually build Viking ships, and it's pretty cool to watch. I watched them hammering away one year, building a Viking ship. Obviously, this is kind of nice because it happens faster when they're building Viking ships in Roskilde. It takes quite a while. So when I got to see them, I just got to see them working for a bit on chopping wood. But it's a pretty cool thing. And some of you might even be interested in boat building. So boat building is still a thing today. People still buy wooden boats, maybe not Viking boats as much, but I think that I would probably buy a Viking boat if they were for sale. So that's a potential craft that you could think about getting into, boat building. Now in London, it's not the most boat area, but there's other parts of Canada where a lot of people buy nice wooden boats. And so that's a real job still today, to build boats. And it was a big job in the Viking era. And yeah, today people still love their boats. And so, yeah, you could always consider thinking about, learning some skills here. So this will be a fun video for some of you to look at and check out and, enjoy. So anyways, I hope you learned something from this video today. And cheers. Bye.